Okay, in this video lecture, I am going to cover section 10.1, which is titled Cellular Respiration and Overview. And the objectives for this lesson is to talk about how do organisms get energy, give you a brief overall description of how cellular respiration works and kind of the 3 stages of it, and then tie in how is cellular respiration related to photosynthesis. So before we get started, I need you to think back to photosynthesis. Okay, think about some of the energy storing molecules that were created or that were discussed in photosynthesis. I'm looking for 2 of them. Okay, so what 2 energy storing molecules did we discuss? Hopefully you are thinking ATP and NADPH. Okay, and remember that ATP, they kind of compared it as like a battery that could be fully charged, and then once you use it, you could recharge it. So ADP has this ability that once you cleave off that phosphate, energy is released, and then you could slap a phosphate back on and reuse that energy molecule. We talked about NADPH, how it picks up an electron and a hydrogen and carries it somewhere, drops them off, etc., to be used to make sugars back in the Kelvin cycle or late independent reactions. So why am I discussing energy molecules? Well, cellular respiration's main job is to make ATP, okay? So let's talk a little bit, how do we get to ATP? Well, it actually starts with food, aka glucose. So, food, sugar, carbs, they provide living things with the building blocks we need to grow and reproduce. We discussed last chapter autotrophs versus heterotrophs, how autotrophs make that glucose through photosynthesis. They make their own food. Heterotrophs can't do that. So they have to get that glucose from the food that they eat, hence the term heterotrophs, different kind of food source there. Glucose is chemical energy, okay? And, all food has chemical energy in it. And when you break those bonds, energy gets released. So here's the glucose molecule. You can see it's 6 carbon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see that it has 6 oxygen. Those are the red ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 12 little white atoms there. And when you break these bonds, energy gets released. So food is a form of chemical energy. So we get our energy that we need from food. Now you may notice that on the side of the nutrition label of whatever you're eating, you'll see some facts about how many calories it has, total fat, total carbs, the amount of protein in it. But the term I want to discuss is calories. So in science, a calorie with a lowercase c is the amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. So if I had a gram of water and I raised it 1 degree Celsius, the amount of energy it took to do that is considered a calorie. Now, calorie with a big C, which you find on the food labels, is actually a kilocalorie. 1 calorie with a big C is 1,000 of these calories with the lowercase c. Okay, so calories with a big C, if it's 220, how many calories with a lowercase c is that? Yeah, do the math. You just move the decimal place over 3 times. Okay, so 220,000 calories with a lowercase c. So why do I, mention that? It's just that we're going to do a lab and we're going to measure the calorie content between marshmallows and cheese puffs, and discuss how the body can use other food sources and break those bonds, like fat, and protein is also used as a fuel source. So that chemical energy that we consume, carbs, fats, and proteins, we eat it, and we give off carbon dioxide and water, heat as a waste product, but we do create ATP with that. So that fuels our metabolism, and we also give off heat again. So the amount of calorie in each macromolecule does vary. If I had a gram of a carb, that's roughly 4,000 calories with a lowercase c, or 4 calories with a big C. If I had a gram of fat, look at the number on that, about, around 9,000 calories. Okay, so like over double, if not double, of a carb, so 9 calories. Protein is about the same as a carb. And so what organisms do is they break down these food molecules very gradually, because if they broke all the bonds, there would be combustion. That cell would erupt into flames. So we need energy to carry out a lot of different life processes, to grow, to move, to reproduce, some animals use it to make food if they're autotrophs, but we use it, in every chemical reaction our body does, the metabolism. So the overview of cellular respiration is basically you convert energy, from glucose. You're breaking those bonds, and you're creating energy. But you do give off some other waste products like carbon dioxide and water. So the chemical equation is C6H12O6. That's my sugar, my glucose. 6O2 yields 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus ATP. Here's the word equation. Glucose plus oxygen undergo a chemical reaction to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So this is the equation for combustion. Wood, is made up of carbohydrates. You need oxygen for a fire, and waste products of a fire, CO2, water, and heat. Respiration, making ATP and some heat, we basically do it over many steps, and that's why you see multiple arrows here. We take glucose, we cleave off a bond or a carbon. We have some oxygen in there. We go through a lot of different stepwise formation, but we end up with ATP energy, carbon dioxide, and water as waste products there. So the stages of cellular respiration, there are 3 of them: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain, which, this is how your book breaks up cellular respiration. So we will talk about glycolysis in a different lecture, but glycolysis only captures 10% of the energy that's in glucose. So we make energy, but not a great amount of it. There's still 90% available in these molecules called pyruvic acid. So you notice that we have glucose here. It's a 6-carbon molecule. And what did we do? We literally broke it in half. And when we broke it in half, we were able to get 10% of the energy. So there's still 90% available in these 2 molecules. And then we have the Krebs cycle. A little bit more energy is captured from pyruvic acid. I'm going to tell you right now it's not a lot, but notice that we also create a waste product here, CO2. And it's going to create some intermediate molecules that will go on to the electron transport chain. And now we have oxygen that gets converted to water. And then we're going to create a whole bunch of energy. And this is where most of the energy is captured due to this final electron acceptor, which is oxygen. So oxygen and energy go hand in hand, but to look at the 3 stages, glycolysis, Krebs cycle, etc., 1, 2, 3, notice that in order for, cellular respiration to occur, to go through glycolysis, the Krebs and etc., you need oxygen. Okay, this is a process that requires oxygen, and when it needs oxygen, we call it aerobic. It's an aerobic process. And the Krebs cycle and the etc. Both occur in the mitochondria. If I go back, notice that this is outside the mitochondria. We are in the cytoplasm of the cell. The Krebs cycle and the etc. happen in the mitochondria. That's why the mitochondria is called the powerhouse of the cell, because it creates a whole bunch of ATP in this final step here. Now, if there is no oxygen available, your body can still make energy. It can still do glycolysis. Your body always does glycolysis. But if there is not enough oxygen available, then your body will go through fermentation. This also happens in the cytoplasm. What we do is we make energy here, ATP, and then we will create some molecules that help glycolysis to continue. But you don't get as much energy, and you also build up a waste product called lactic acid, which causes muscle soreness. Okay, and then finally, comparing photosynthesis and cellular respiration. when I slapped the equation up on the board a couple of days ago and asked you how could you measure the rate of the rate of cellular respiration, and I told you to think back to the photosynthesis lab, you may have noticed that they are opposite reactions of each other. So we covered photosynthesis in the last chapter. Okay, the reactants for photosynthesis, what goes into the process? CO2 and water. What comes out of photosynthesis? Glucose and oxygen. What goes into cellular respiration? Glucose and oxygen. What comes out of cellular respiration? Carbon dioxide and water. So they are the reverse of each other. The reactants of one are the products of the other, and vice versa. And these two, they keep each other in check. It's a great balance, check and balance in life. So just to recap, I don't know if you have these in your notes, okay? So the equation for cellular respiration, okay, that means we are going to start with sugar and oxygen and create carbon dioxide, water, and energy, which is ATP. Photosynthesis is the opposite. So take a look at this on the other side of the arrow. We're going to start with carbon dioxide and water, and we're going to create sugar and oxygen. Cellular respiration, where does that take place inside of a cell, the mitochondria, and the cytoplasm? Where does photosynthesis take place inside of a cell, of a plant cell? The chloroplast. The occurrence. Okay, when do we do this process? All the time. We have to make ATP all the time to carry out metabolism. Photosynthesis, all the time. Plant cells do this, when they have every material that they need to make the glucose, but they do it for the most part all the time. Reactants, what goes into cellular respiration? Refer back to this equation. What goes into it? Sugar and oxygen. What goes into photosynthesis? Water, carbon dioxide. Products, what comes out? Carbon dioxide, water. Oh, and ATP, energy. Forgot energy. Oops. Products for photosynthesis, sugar and oxygen. The energy source, food. What's the ultimate energy source for photosynthesis? Sunlight. So that's a nice side-by-side comparison of photosynthesis to cellular respiration. So I talked about how organisms get energy, and that is through food, and then they break the food molecules down to get to glucose, and then it's glucose that's really providing the energy to create ATP. Explain how cellular respiration works. Talked about 3 stages, glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the ETC, and kind of how that works. Just briefly, we'll go more in depth later on. And then the relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration, how they are opposites of each other. So yeah, that does it for this